When we think of the Middle Ages, we often imagine castles, knights, and cold stone walls. But what happened when the day ended, when candles burned low and the world fell into silence? This video gently explores how people in the medieval world prepared for rest, what they believed about the night, and how they slept, from the softness of a hay-stuffed mattress to the quiet fears of dreams and the dark. A history not of kings and battles, but of pillows, prayers, and the deep mystery of sleep. Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply listen, as we enter the nighttime world of the past. The rhythm of medieval night. In a world lit only by fire, night arrived early and lingered long. Without electricity or artificial light, most people lived by the sun. When daylight faded, the world slowed. Work ceased, animals were tucked away, and meals were finished before dusk. The medieval concept of time was different than ours. People didn't divide the night by hours on a clock, but by natural cues: the fading sky, the chiming of monastery bells, or the call of roosters before dawn. Most peasants and townsfolk rose with the sun and slept soon after nightfall. But sleep was not always taken in one long stretch. In fact, most medieval people practiced what we now call segmented sleep. They would go to bed for a few hours, their first sleep, then wake in the middle of the night. During this quiet interval, people might pray, think, tend to the fire, talk with others in the house, or simply lie awake. Then they would return to bed for their second sleep, and finally rise before sunrise. This pattern was natural in a world without electric light, and many even considered the hours between first and second sleep to be a sacred time, a moment for reflection or quiet connection, where they slept. In castles, monasteries, and peasant cottages alike, sleeping arrangements were simple, and often shared. A peasant family might all sleep in the same room, sometimes in the same bed, especially during the cold seasons. A typical bed was little more than a wooden frame filled with straw, leaves, or wool, called a pallet. Some were covered with coarse linen sheets or woolen blankets. Pillows were rare for the poor, but more common among the wealthy. In wealthier homes, such as a lord's manor or a merchant's townhouse, you might find a four-poster bed with heavy curtains, which served not only for privacy but also to block out cold drafts. These curtains were often made of thick wool or embroidered linen, and sometimes richly decorated. Children might sleep on benches, in trundle beds that rolled out from under larger ones, or simply on rushes laid across the floor. Monks, meanwhile, slept in rows on simple wooden boards with thin blankets. Silence was expected, and often the only light was from a small oil lamp burning low in a corner. No matter the setting, nighttime was a time to rest, but also to reflect, to pray, and sometimes to fear. The fear of the night. For many people in the Middle Ages, night was not only dark, it was dangerous. The absence of light allowed space for superstition to grow. The night was the domain of ghosts, demons, and spirits. Many believed that sickness traveled more easily in the dark. Sudden deaths, night sweats, and bad dreams were often blamed on evil forces lurking near the bed. It was common to place blessed objects near the pillow, such as a wooden cross, a holy medal, or a pouch of herbs thought to ward off spirits. Some stitched prayers into their pillowcases. Others sprinkled holy water in the corners of the room before sleep. Dreams too held deep meaning. A peaceful dream might be a sign of divine favor. A frightening dream could be a warning from God or the devil. Some people kept dream books to interpret their visions, especially clergy and mystics. And then there were the practical fears: robbers, fire, rats, sickness. Night watchmen patrolled towns. Candles had to be carefully snuffed out to avoid deadly fires. Doors were bolted. Children were told quiet bedtime stories, not always to entertain but to warn. Sleep, while essential, was not always safe. Rituals of rest, how the night began. As the sun dipped behind distant hills and the shadows stretched long across fields and village streets, the medieval world began to settle into its nighttime rhythm. For most people, especially in rural areas, nightfall meant an end to all productive labor. Without artificial lighting, working after sunset was difficult and even dangerous. In many homes, a soft hush fell as family members began to prepare for rest. But sleeping in the Middle Ages wasn't simply a matter of lying down, it was a ritual in itself. Before bed, certain small tasks were repeated night after night. In cottages, women banked the hearth fires by covering the embers with ashes, a practice called raking the fire. This allowed the coals to stay warm until morning, when they could be easily rekindled. Water was fetched and placed near the bed, both for drinking and for any nighttime needs. If there was a chamber pot, it was emptied and set near the edge of the bed. In wealthier homes, a servant might prepare the bedchamber, drawing the bed curtains closed, arranging pillows, folding down woolen sheets, or lighting a taper for the final few moments of the evening. Prayers were a vital part of bedtime. Almost everyone, rich or poor, believed that sleep was a vulnerable state, one in which the soul could wander or evil could approach. As a result, many recited set prayers asking for divine protection during the night. A popular one was the Latin antiphon, In manus tuas Domini commendo spiritum meum, which means, Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. Children were often taught a version of this from an early age, sometimes stitched into samplers, spoken aloud beside the hearth, or whispered under linen blankets. For those who could read, a psalter or book of hours might be used, especially among noblewomen and clergy. These devotional books contained prayers, illustrations, and calendars of saints' days. Some women kept them beside their beds or hung small versions around their necks. In monasteries, monks followed a strict schedule. The rule of Saint Benedict, which guided much of monastic life, included detailed instructions for sleep and waking. Monks would go to bed early, rise again in the middle of the night for matins, a service of prayers and psalms, and then return to sleep. Silence was strictly observed in the dormitories, and the entire act of lying down, sleeping, and rising was considered part of one's spiritual discipline. Among the laity, people also believed in protecting themselves physically and spiritually while they slept. Amulets were sometimes worn at night or kept under the pillow. These could include crosses, dried herbs sewn into pouches, or tiny tokens engraved with protective words or saints' names. Women who had recently given birth often slept with iron implements or knives under their beds to ward off spirits they believed might harm the baby. There were also folk traditions involving dream protection. Some people placed a bowl of water under the bed to trap bad spirits, while others drew a small chalk circle around their sleeping area. These traditions varied from region to region, often passed down by grandmothers or local wise women. For most people, sleep began early, especially in the cold months, when the sun might set before 5 p.m. Families gathered together near the fire or in bed, sometimes telling stories or singing low songs. With no smartphones, no glow of electric lights, and no urgency to be productive at all hours, the pace of life slowed naturally, inviting sleep. Shared beds, shared sleep. One thing that often surprises modern viewers is just how commonly people shared beds in the past. A family might all sleep in one large bed or on mats near the fire. It wasn't uncommon for unrelated people to share beds, especially in inns, convents, or among travelers. The idea of a bed as a deeply private space is relatively modern. In the Middle Ages, warmth and protection were more important than solitude. Even in castle halls, where a nobleman might have his own bedchamber, he was rarely alone. Servants, bodyguards, and attendants often slept nearby or even on the same floor. Bed curtains provided some privacy, but not complete isolation. Children often slept beside their mothers or with siblings. In some households, the oldest child might help care for the youngest during the night, sharing blankets or watching over a crying baby while the mother slept. The practice of bed sharing was not limited to families either. In monasteries, monks slept side by side on narrow cots or wooden platforms, separated only by silence and discipline. In convents, nuns also lived and slept communally, with their beds arranged in long rows, simple and equal, covered in coarse linens. Travelers, too, often found themselves sharing sleeping space. At roadside inns, guests who had never met might be asked to sleep in the same bed. This was more a matter of practicality than comfort. Beds were expensive and warm rooms even more so. Sometimes, a thin plank or roll of fabric was placed between strangers and shared beds, especially if they were of different classes or genders. But often it was simply accepted as part of travel. Even royalty were not always guaranteed privacy. Kings and queens had attendants and guards who slept within earshot, and visitors to their chambers, especially ambassadors or high clergy, might stay overnight in adjoining spaces or within the same suite. Dreams and sleep beliefs. Once asleep, the medieval person entered a world that was not merely unconscious. It was often thought to be spiritual. Dreams were powerful and their meaning was taken seriously. Some dreams were believed to be divine messages, while others were warnings, temptations, or signs of illness. Saints, angels, even demons were said to visit people in their dreams. Those who lived a deeply religious life, monks, anchorites, nuns, sometimes recorded dreams they believed came from God. These dream visions were often full of symbolism. Rivers of fire, climbing ladders to heaven, voices echoing through golden halls. Writers such as Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich shared their visions in writing, believing that their dreams were forms of revelation. But ordinary people also feared dreams. A dream of falling might be taken as a warning of spiritual failure. A dream of snakes might suggest betrayal. Pregnant women especially paid close attention to their dreams, believing they could indicate the future character or destiny of the child. There were even dream interpreters, women or wise men who were known in their communities for understanding symbols seen during sleep. They might explain dreams using folk knowledge, the stars, or ancient books passed down over generations. As midnight passed, the homes of medieval towns and villages became hushed. The embers in the hearth glowed faintly, and the heavy air inside stone walls grew colder. But not everyone remained asleep. In the dark, many would briefly stir. Some would lie awake reflecting. Others would rise quietly, drink water, or stoke the fire just enough to keep it alive until morning. This quiet interval between first and second sleep was often considered a sacred time, a moment for prayer, memory, or quiet connection with one's thoughts. People sometimes used this time to talk gently with others in the house, or to pray for their ancestors and loved ones. It wasn't considered insomnia. It was simply part of the rhythm of night. For the devout, this waking period was a natural hour to connect with God. Some even believed the veil between the earthly and spiritual worlds was thinner during these moments. In monastic communities, this idea was formalized into midnight prayers, with monks waking in the deep night for matins. Peasants, without bells or books, often used their senses to judge when it was time to rest again. A yawn, a shift in the wind, the change in bird calls just before dawn. Soon they would ease back into their second sleep, a peaceful, unhurried return to dreams. Night fears, sleep disorders, and the shadowy world of the dark. For medieval people, sleep wasn't always gentle. Beneath the soft linen sheets, beyond the whispered prayers, and behind the closed wooden shutters, there were fears, deep, old, and often unnamed. The night had its own dangers. Some real, some imagined, some born from faith, others from folklore. While we now understand conditions like insomnia, sleepwalking, or night terrors through a medical lens, medieval people interpreted such experiences very differently. A restless sleeper was not simply stressed. They might be under a curse, affected by sin, or visited by spirits in the night. Let's walk gently into that shadowed world. Strange visitors in the night. It was widely believed in medieval Europe that unseen forces roamed freely after dark. The day belonged to men and order, but night belonged to things less stable. Spirits, demons, and the unknowable. A household might be peaceful by day but uneasy by candlelight. One of the most feared nighttime experiences was something we now recognize as sleep paralysis. The sensation of waking up but being unable to move, sometimes accompanied by a sense of a presence sitting on one's chest. Medieval people didn't think of this as neurological. They saw it as an attack by a night demon. In some parts of Europe, this being was called the mare, a creature that would sit on the chest of a sleeper and bring nightmares. The word nightmare itself comes from this old belief. Others spoke of succubi or incubi, spirits said to visit people at night, causing both fear and temptation. To protect against such things, people used holy symbols, charms, and ritual gestures. A crucifix by the bed. A prayer whispered again and again before sleep. A candle placed beside a bedpost. Salt lines drawn near doorways. For many, the fear of nighttime harm was not superstition, it was reality. When sleep became a problem. Medical understanding of sleep was still developing in the Middle Ages. Sleep was considered one of the non-naturals, a set of 6 factors that influenced a person's health, including air, food, motion, rest, emotions, and evacuation of wastes. Sleep was important, but too much of it or too little could bring imbalance to the body's humors. Physicians of the time believed that poor sleep could result from bad digestion, melancholy, or excessive wind in the stomach. To treat sleeplessness, herbal remedies were often recommended. Common suggestions included valerian root, lettuce seed, poppy syrup, or even a warm bath with chamomile flowers. These remedies were often administered by local wise women or midwives more than by trained doctors. One medieval medical text suggested drinking a small cup of wine boiled with fennel, mint, and honey before bed. Another advised placing lavender or sage under the pillow to invite calm dreams. The scent of crushed rose petals, when placed in a pouch near the bed, was thought to ease racing thoughts. Dream interpretation also played a role in diagnosis. If someone frequently had disturbing dreams, it might be taken as a sign of internal disorder, or a spiritual imbalance that required confession or penance. Insomnia and wakefulness. People who struggled to sleep, those with true insomnia, were said to be afflicted with wakefulness. But again, the causes were thought to be either physical, imbalance of hot and cold in the body, or spiritual. Worry, unresolved sins, or a troubled soul might keep someone awake for hours. Insomnia was considered dangerous if it lasted too long. The body was thought to grow cold inside, the humors thickened, and illness could take hold. For that reason, calming the mind was a key focus of treatment. Storytelling was one common remedy, either someone telling a quiet tale near the hearth, or the person repeating a simple story or prayer in their own mind until sleep returned. In some cases, insomnia was seen as a divine gift. Saints were known to sleep little or not at all, and this was sometimes considered a mark of holiness. Saint Catherine of Siena, for instance, was said to have gone without sleep for days during periods of fasting and religious ecstasy. Second sleep, the mysterious middle of the night. In earlier parts, we discussed segmented sleep, the practice of sleeping in 2 separate blocks of time. This wasn't considered odd in the medieval world, it was normal. After the first period of rest, lasting roughly 4 hours, people often woke naturally. During this time, the house might still be quiet, but not everyone stayed in bed. Some used the time to pray or reflect. Others might sit by the hearth, tend to small chores, or even have quiet conversation with loved ones. In rural homes, a mother might nurse a child. In monasteries, a monk might rise to sing matins. In cities, a candle might flicker to life as a scribe copied a few more lines of text in silence. This period between sleeps, usually around midnight to 2 a.m., was sometimes called the watch. It was a space of stillness, a time where the world was briefly awake but not busy. A time where thoughts felt longer, where dreams lingered at the edge of consciousness, and where prayer was believed to rise more easily into the heavens. After an hour or two, people returned to their beds for their second sleep, often deeper and filled with richer dreams. Nighttime remedies and bedside customs. Across medieval Europe, people developed countless small customs to encourage better sleep. Though based more on tradition than science, these practices were passed down for generations. For example, in rural England, people believed that placing a piece of iron under the mattress would keep away nightmares. In France, it was said that mugwort under the pillow would invite prophetic dreams. In some parts of Italy, women sewed tiny pieces of scripture into the corners of their pillows to keep spirits from whispering into their ears while they slept. Bed hangings and curtains weren't just for warmth. They were for protection, both physical and spiritual. Some families embroidered stars or crosses into their bed linens for added safety. In winter, hot stones or warming pans were placed between the sheets to remove the bite of cold, especially for children or the elderly. And in many households, the last person to sleep was expected to bless the room, either with words, gestures, or by making the sign of the cross over the door, between darkness and dawn. By the time the stars began to fade and the first soft pink of morning crept across the sky, households slowly stirred again. The fire was uncovered and stoked. Roosters began to crow. A mother might gently wake her children, or a monk might ring a bell for early prayers. But those moments just before dawn, the final breaths of the night, were often remembered as the most peaceful. In many poems and stories from the period, the quiet before sunrise was described as silver, holy, or clear like a river in sleep. For medieval people, the night was more than a blank space between days. It was a living part of life. A time for fear, for faith, for mystery, for dreams. And so, when they laid their heads down each evening, it was with the knowledge that sleep was both a necessity and a journey, a quiet walk into a different world. Dreams, dawn, and the gentle return to day. As the medieval night wore on and the world around lay cloaked in stillness, dreams emerged like whispers in the dark. Whether fleeting or vivid, dreams were not dismissed as idle imagination. They were treated as messages, symbols, or warnings from forces beyond understanding. In the Middle Ages, dreams could come from many sources: divine revelation, demonic temptation, bodily imbalance, or even the influence of the stars. The boundary between the earthly and spiritual world was never far in medieval minds, and never thinner than during sleep. Dreams as divine messages. For deeply religious individuals, especially clergy and mystics, dreams were viewed as potential revelations from God. Monks and nuns sometimes recorded their dreams in journals, believing them to hold spiritual truths. Dreams of saints, of angelic voices, or of bright heavenly light were interpreted as signs of divine favor or guidance. Famous religious women like Saint Hildegard of Bingen described visions that came to her during sleep and wakefulness, vivid images of fire, stars, and divine beings. She believed these were not simply dreams, but messages meant to be shared. Her visions were later illustrated in beautiful medieval manuscripts, with golden light spilling across page after page. Julian of Norwich, another revered woman mystic, experienced what she called showings, deeply emotional visions that brought her comfort and insight during a period of illness. These spiritual dreams formed the foundation of her writings, now recognized as some of the earliest known texts by a woman in English. For ordinary people, dreams involving light, wings, flowers, or peaceful music were often considered positive. A dream of a loved one smiling was a sign of peace. A dream of a saint offering bread or drink might suggest a coming blessing. But not all dreams brought comfort. Bad dreams, warnings, and night terrors. Just as some dreams were seen as holy, others were deeply feared. A dream of falling might mean disgrace or spiritual danger. A dream of wolves or fire might signal illness. A dream of someone already dead could be seen as a warning from the other side, especially if that person spoke in the dream. Many feared being visited in dreams by spirits, demons, or the restless dead. To protect against such visions, people often said protective prayers before bed, or kept a blessed object, such as a piece of palm from Easter Sunday, under their pillow. If nightmares persisted, some turned to the local priest. Others sought out the wisdom of a village healer or dream interpreter. Some dream guides existed in manuscript form, books that listed common dreams and their meanings. These dream books, often copied by hand, were passed from person to person. A woman dreaming of water might be told she would soon receive news. A man dreaming of fire might be warned to watch his temper or to prepare for conflict. In some households, a mother might sit by a restless child's bed and murmur old sayings, soft phrases meant to bind the dream and keep it from following the child into waking life. Waking up rituals of morning. As the blackness of night gave way to the blue hush of early dawn, the people of medieval Europe returned slowly to the waking world. There were no alarm clocks, no digital chimes, no buzzing, just the first faint song of birds, the stirring of animals, and the cool breath of morning air moving through cracks in the timbered walls. In rural homes, the first to rise was often the mother or eldest daughter. They would quietly rekindle the fire, drawing back ashes to find glowing coals and place kindling on top. A pot of oats or barley might be placed to warm. The fire, carefully tended at night, became the heart of the home once again. In towns, the sound of footsteps on cobblestone might mark the beginning of market day. A bell from a nearby chapel might ring softly, calling people to lauds, the early morning prayer. In monasteries, monks rose well before sunrise. They moved in silence to the chapel for their next service, continuing a daily rhythm of devotion that spanned both night and day. Their wake-up was not jarring, it was slow, deliberate, and sacred. Light returns. In homes with shuttered windows, a servant or child might be tasked with opening the wooden slats to let in the first light. This act was both practical and symbolic, allowing heat and clarity into the home, pushing away shadows and spirits, and marking the transition from rest to activity. Some people said a prayer of thanks upon waking. A simple Deo gratias, thanks be to God. Others crossed themselves or kissed a pendant or crucifix worn through the night. The sleep garments worn were plain, usually a long linen shift or tunic. These were folded and stored if the person had another garment for day. Beds were recovered, curtains drawn back, floors swept. And with this gentle order, the day began. For those who had slept well, the morning brought peace. For those troubled by restless dreams, they might carry a quiet heaviness with them, one they'd try to shake off during their morning chores or prayers. The return to ordinary life. Soon daily rhythms took over. Animals were fed. Doors were unbolted. Neighbors might be heard sweeping outside. Children began their small tasks. The memory of night slowly faded into the simple patterns of the day. But unlike in modern times, the memory of sleep wasn't forgotten completely. People in the Middle Ages continued to talk about their dreams, interpret their meanings, and honor the rituals of rest and waking. Sleep was a sacred space, where the body restored itself but also where the soul wandered. A place of mystery, of divine communication, and of vulnerability. It was never just a physical act. It was spiritual. It was emotional. It was deeply human. And in that quiet moment each night, as the fire glowed low and prayers drifted upward like smoke, the people of the Middle Ages entrusted themselves, body and soul, to the deep silence of sleep. Sleep has always been with us. Long before electricity, before clocks, before smartphones and sleepless schedules, humans slept under the stars, beside fires, on straw and under wool. Though centuries have passed, our need for sleep has not changed. What has changed is how we treat it. In the Middle Ages, sleep was slower. The darkness was deeper. The night was not an interruption between two halves of life. It was a world of its own. It brought mystery, fear, beauty, and sometimes wisdom. The people of medieval Europe did not try to defeat sleep. They did not shorten it with stimulants or push it away with glowing screens. Instead, they gave into it, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes gratefully. They saw sleep not as a waste of time but as a necessary surrender. A moment where they could hand their lives over to faith, to protection, to dreams. When people awoke in the night, they didn't panic. They didn't reach for a phone. They simply rested, reflected, or whispered prayers into the dark. This idea, that the night has a rhythm, a pause, a breath, is something many modern people have forgotten. In monasteries, nighttime was holy. In villages, it was quiet and warm, filled with the creak of timber, the soft sigh of sleep, and the rustling of hay in the loft. In castles, servants closed the bed curtains and placed warming stones under the sheets. In all these places, people folded into themselves body, mind, and spirit and allowed rest to take hold. Dreams across time. Even the dreams of medieval people reflect something eternal. They dreamed of love and fear. They dreamed of family and danger. They worried about tomorrow. They sought meaning in symbols, rivers, birds, ladders, stars. A dream was not a curiosity. It was a message, a warning, a puzzle to be understood. Whether through the voice of a saint or the flickering of a candle, dreams gave them something to carry through their day. And perhaps, deep down, they hoped as we do that sleep would bring answers. That in stillness, truth might whisper something we missed while awake. The enduring legacy of sleep. Today we can learn something from this slower time. Not everything must be busy. Not every hour needs to be lit. Sleep is not the enemy of productivity, it is a return to balance. The medieval world teaches us that rest can be sacred. That preparing for bed can be a ritual of peace. That silence is not emptiness but fullness. And that sleep, that simple, ancient act, connects us across time more than almost anything else. So the next time you lie down, whether in a warm bed or a quiet room, think of them, the people of the past. The monk rising for matins. The mother whispering prayers. The child wrapped in wool beside the hearth. All of them sleeping beneath the same sky, under stars that still shine. In sleep we are all part of history. Though centuries divide us, the act of sleep unites every generation. Beneath different roofs, on beds of feathers, straw, or memory foam, the need remains unchanged. To pause, to retreat, to heal. The medieval people, without scientific studies or sleep apps, understood one simple truth, that the body cannot endure without stillness. That the mind cannot think clearly unless given space to rest. Their rituals, slow and sacred, were not just customs. They were gentle survival. Some slept near livestock, others beneath banners of gold. Some with prayer books, others with worry. But in the dark they all released control. They all trusted that the night would carry them forward. And perhaps that's what sleep really is. Not just rest, but trust. Trust that the fire will stay lit. That the home will hold. That morning will come. When we look back at how medieval people slept, we are not just learning about them, we are remembering something about ourselves. Something ancient. Something true.